Greetings to all of you and welcome to another edition of Political Focus. I am Samson in Yaoundé, accompanied by the other members of the production team. The major national dialogue that just took place in Yaoundé was expected to usher in an air of appeasement throughout Cameroon, coming as it were in between the release of 333 detainees in connection with a bloody conflict in the northwest and southwest regions and the discontinuance of military court proceedings against some officials and supporters of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, the CRM political party, who were protesting against the results of the 2018 presidential election. In fact, these presidential gestures and the mood of frank talk and consensus that prevailed during the major national dialogue actually seem to have begun producing their desired effects when an outburst with ethnic undertones occurred in Malima in the south region. Some business structures were said to have been destroyed, thereby causing friction between members of two main ethnic communities. Apparently, the Malima incident was in many ways similar to what happened in Obala in the central region more than 1 year ago, with both incidents resulting from the death of young men under unclear circumstances. Way back in 2005, a professor of sociology, anthropology and communication, Francis B. Nyamjo, in the book Africa's Media, Democracy and the Politics of Belonging, explained how media outlets in Cameroon were polarizing the society on ethnic and tribal lines. He warned against the problems politics of belonging could create for the country. But since then, ethnic cleavages appear to have been eating deep into the fabric of the Cameroonian society to a point where even a road accident or other natural incidents are only seen and interpreted through such divisive lenses. And the consequence has been the stigmatization of entire communities, further increasing the risk of inter-ethnic confrontation between and among groups that had lived peacefully for several decades. Perhaps the disturbing signals from Malima and other recent incidents of a similar nature are just the early warning shots to each and every Cameroonian that we are sleepwalking towards the Rwandan scenario. A scenario whereby politicians without scruple seek to make capital from ethnic divisions. And so the earlier we nip such machinations in the bud, the better it will be for Cameroon that is struggling to mend the patchwork of a nation that is no longer at ease with itself. Stay tuned. I will be back in a moment. You are welcome back. Up next is our press review with Charles Tembe, who took interest in the political stories reported by the newspapers.
The Sun newspaper reports about the wave of violence that swept the town of Malima recently following the killing of a Cameroonian motorbike rider and consequent destruction of shops and looting of goods belonging to non-indigenes. The paper writes that the incident is a crack on the living together which may induce an intertribal conflict if not well handled. Le Jour reports that there is a massive exodus from Malima of persons of Bamoun extraction who fear for their safety. Le Jeudien says simmering ethnic divides threaten to tear Cameroon apart, with Malima being the theater of what the paper described as a civil war between indigenes and non-indigenes. adding reports that anger has greeted xenophobic attacks on Bamuns, Bamlikis, and other non-indigenous in Sangmalima by the youth of the indigenous clan. For Mutation, the happenings in Sangmalima, capital of Jah and Lobo, is a sign of the times, coming after the major national dialogue to assuage the lingering tensions in the country. The paper says after the major dialogue, there is now need for an inter-community dialogue. Cameroon Insider reports that it is a happy end to the Sangmalima riots as the government has stepped in to promote community conviviality.
Charles Tembe with our press review. The Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanganji, was recently in Sangmalima with a message of appeasement from the head of state to the population of the town following recent incidents during which some business units were destroyed by angry youths. The minister shared a common meal with the youth, calling on members of the ethnic communities at the center of the conflict to bury the hatchet and live as brothers and sisters of the same country. However, although calm is said to have returned to Sangmalima, the incident that occurred there remains indicative of an air of negative ethnicity that has been brewing across Cameroon of late. Sam Bukuba now tries to reconcile the problem of negative ethnicity with the concept of living together in Cameroon.
The recent showdown in Sangmalima has once again brought to the fore the cracks in the ethno-regional edifice in Cameroon. Professor Willibrod Zingwa blames the recurrent ethnic outbursts on the ethnicization of politics or political ethnicity.
Before 1990, Cameroonians were more united than today. Multi-party democracy has brought about what I call negative ethnicities. People have reduced themselves to identify with political parties from their ethnic cleavages, and it is tearing the people in those lines. And some zones are no-go areas for others.
Concomitant with negative ethnicity is the emphasis on what divides Cameroonians rather than what unites them, says Professor Reverend Kizito Fobi.
I think from this present standpoint, the different diversities is hurting our unity because we have stressed so much our differences that what puts us together is almost absent in every discussion. I think that's the sad side of our social landscape.
When ethnic divisions play out in such a delicate patchwork as Cameroon, coupled with economic adversity, the consequence can only be the kind of conflagration witnessed in Sangmalima that throw up challenges to national unity, national integration, and peaceful coexistence.
Fighting between communities against themselves is a barrier to our living together on our national unity. Big towns in our country have today become cosmopolitan cities in which so many communities live together. Our populations aspire to live together within the national territory in a country that belongs to all of us. A reason why many among us have gone for pasture elsewhere. It suffices only an incident for this community to fight against themselves.
The demographics and cosmopolitan character of modern-day towns and cities require a positive accommodation between people of diverse ethno-cultural backgrounds. The mayor of Sangmalima, Angenuel Essien.
We are trying to explain to the population that the town is cosmopolitan and not the village. The town belongs to everybody who is living in the town, and not only native, but every Cameroonian who can decide to come and live in Sangmalima. So the council is treating everybody in the same manner. We have not a policy specially done for the native and policy especially done for older Cameroonians.
To check negative ethnicity in the country's body politic, Professor Zingwa advocates the removal of notions like natives and non-natives enshrined in the constitution in order to de-emphasize the ethnic origins of Cameroonians.
The notion of the us and the they should be raised in a constitution. I'm talking about the idea of autochtony and allogeny, the strangers and the settlers, all of those concepts. So if a child from the very first day he goes to school knows that I am from this part, this other person is from that part, it builds some early stage of hatred because there is a notion of the us and the they.
And the feeling of we versus them is not only prejudicial to social cohesion, but also constitute a volatile ethno-regional mix that may explode at any time. It's time then the policymakers went to work to be proactive and not reactive.
Sam Bukuba. And to help us better understand what is happening in Cameroon today, we have as guest a renowned professor of anthropology, Paul Nkwi. Charles Tembe and Sam Bukuba are here with me to ask the questions which many Cameroonians have been asking. Professor Paul Nkwi, you are welcome to the program Political Focus.
Thanks for inviting me.
We've observed that there is some air of negative ethnicity blowing across Cameroon. What explains the fact that we're having this kind of phenomenon at this particular moment, given that Cameroonians have always been living more or less peacefully in their different communities and in different localities?
One thing is certain, that you can never destroy ethnicity. It's one of the basic things we receive as a people. And in Cameroon, we have 250-something peoples with their language and culture. The four of us sitting around the table probably belong to different ethnic groups. And belonging to an ethnic group is not a crime. And that is what we call moral ethnicity. It's the one into which you are born in, where you acquire the basic values of respect, of justice, and all that goes with it. So basically, all of us belong to a human group, whether we call it Kom, So, Bulu, or whatever. These, according to UNESCO, constitute part of the patrimony of humanity, which ought to be preserved. The UNESCO Declaration on the Existence of Human Groups is clear, in the sense that they virtually say, okay, if you find a little group, let me quote you, a group in Boom, made up of 26 people. They still have their language and they still have their culture with them. But throughout the centuries, this group has perpetuated itself by living its language, by living its culture. Now, when you use your ethnicity as a mechanism of exclusion, that is what you may call negative ethnicity, which I call strategic ethnicity. Because when it comes to the problem of redistribution of resources, the people in control make sure that their own share those resources. And this is where it is painful, especially we as a nation. We, the 200 and something people who have come together, we have natural resources, we have positions, etc., etc. And yet, if somebody or some groups takes 50% of the positions or 50% of the resources, what will happen to the rest of the 200 and something ethnic groups?
Yes, Professor, I was going to ask you, 250 ethnic groups, yet we are living in a republic. How do these ethnic groups dovetail into a republic, and so much so that our ethnic values do not overshadow Republican values?
You see, the term republic as a coin, as a foreign word. Ask yourself, before the Germans colonized Cameroon, we were living. We govern ourselves. We use the resources ourselves. And even when the resources were becoming scarce, we competed for that.
You fought battles?
Definitely. There were battles, there were skirmishes, there were conflicts between groups over the use of land, over the use of wildlife, and over the use of fertile land. And you all know, a few years ago, the conflict between Kom and Oku. It was over land.
If you are just tuning in, this is Political Focus, coming to you from the national station of the CRTV in Yaoundé. Our guest is Professor Paul Nkwi, with whom we are discussing the problem of negative ethnicity in Cameroon. Prof, let's come back to this issue of negative ethnicity, because the period of intertribal wars is over, but we are having what we can call resurgence of these cases, like what we had in Sang Melima. Before then, we had another incident in Obala, And during the campaign towards the 2018 presidential elections, we saw people trying to assert themselves along ethnic lines. That's the worry we are talking about.
Yeah, like I said, belonging to an ethnic group is nothing wrong. It's more, that's what I call it, moral ethnicity. To be a Bafut man, to be a Kom man, or to be a Banso man, learn this language, there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment you begin to use that as a medium of exclusion, it becomes a problem. Take, for example, we have a high degree of unemployment. Take, for example, Sangmelema, if you want us to come back to it. For young people to survive, they have all turned to bent skin. And who are these people who have the capacity to acquire means of having a bent skin? You will discover that there are certain ethnic groups who don't have this economic power and economic acumen to have a bent skin and to be able to exploit whatever is available. And I think that creates a problem. When there is unemployment in a city like Yaoundé or a city like Sangmelema, where different ethnicities live together, they see how others live. They see how others earn their living. And they begin to identify their riches to their ethnicity. There's bound to be a problem.
How can such negative ethnicity be nipped in the bud?
When there is unemployment, there is bound to be conflict. And when there is unemployment, some cultures have equipped their members to deal with that financial situation, while other cultures do not have those techniques that equip them to be able to deal with it. Let me speak in very broad terms. You can divide all Cameroon cultures into two major cultures. There's a culture which is highly environmentally influenced, where everything is and was available. And there was another culture, and still is, where it was very, very difficult to generate resources. And that is why in French we say, la culture de grenier. If you see cultures in Cameroon who plan on long terms, they have reserves. For long term, in 1953, the governor of Cameroon was Mesmer.
The Frenchman.
Pierre Mesmer.
That's right.
And the same burnings took place in Sangmelema, Ebolova, Balmayo, Yaoundé, and Douala.
For the same reasons?
Yes. They burned down the shops in 53. It's the same thing reoccurring. What had happened at the time is that the entire economy was controlled by Bamileke traders. They had the shops, they sold virtually everything. And the local population who depended on the environment for their own sustenance, that wasn't enough. So what happened is that they all burned down their shops, etc., etc.
Do you find it a contradiction of sorts at a time when so much talk is being made about national unity?
Sometimes I don't want to be negative at a period when we need a language of appeasement. By appointing people into important positions, you are virtually redistributing resources. But if you keep redistributing those resources only to a particular group, others will sit and watch until it gets out of hand. For us to be able to float above negative ethnicity, we need to be inspired by Republican values, where we serve the nation, where we provide the common good.
Prof, going along the line of de-emphasizing ethnicity, some have proposed that in the fundamental law of the land, the Constitution, concepts like indigenes and settlers should be de-emphasized so as to tone down the level of negative ethnicity that may lead to ethnic outbursts such as we've had in Sangmelema, Obara and other places.
I believe what you are saying is that if we are to bring down negative ethnicity, we need to bring in policy. And I think that's fundamental.
Of course.
And that should be built into our constitution, into our fundamental law. Define what ethnicity is and how we can adapt to it, because we can't destroy it. Now, let's take, for example, the missionaries brought us together. We lived in a dormitory, those boarding schools, which are very popular in our
days.
And all of us around the table have lived properly in boarding school.
Yep.
That was the beginning of deconstructing our ethnicity. Till today, my classmates from 1959, I still feel that they're my brothers and sisters. We lived together for 5 years. Where did they come from? Bali, Banso, Eton, Bulu, etc. That to me, I don't know whether the policy of building boarding school really had this in mind, but it eventually produced this breaching of ethnicity. Because imagine young boys who come from the different villages and they are forced to live together, eat together, play together. Just before I enter here, somebody said, we are together. Why? Did you know why he said so? He is not from Kom, but he is a Soban. That's a very strong philosophy, what we call the Soban philosophy, which we have built together as we live together in Sase College. So I'm saying that the missionaries started it. They knew that they were recruiting their students from different ethnic groups. They were preparing them for their country to live and work in their own country. They must learn first to live together here.
Even though, Prof, the social deconstruction through that process at one time slipped off and was replaced by issues like nepotism. You belong
For
to
sure,
a sect.
we'll go to that because we'll give you a job because you are so bad.
That's right.
Sometimes we are proud to say 2 prime ministers came from Sasi, but I'm only saying both the colonizing power and the missionaries were aware of our ethnic diversity and they created those boarding schools. In East Cameroon, there were no boarding schools. They didn't even have uniforms, which is a different, totally different approach. So what I'm trying to say is that the missionaries, whether they were Baptists, Catholics, or what, were aware of our ethnic diversity and what it can do. Because even Europe had its own problem because they belong to different ethnic groups.
At the beginning of this interview, you made mention of politicians who are engineering this unease and these frictions that we are having between different communities. Where we find ourselves today, what do you think should be the way out? Because it's like these communities are stuck in trade when it comes to politicking.
Definitely. If you don't fall back on ethnicity, you cannot survive as a politician.
Which means the problem cannot be solved.
I've said that ethnicity is something you cannot
do without.
It's there. That is the power of culture. The problem with the power of culture is not something that is literally taught in school.
Prof, I understand you so well. We cannot do without this ethnicity. But we have to live in a country. We have to live in a republic and live together. It's a problem. You anthropologists should provide the policy makers the solutions to it.
Thank you for raising that issue, because once the Commission for Multiculturalism and Bilingualism was formed, the chairman called me and we sat together and we had a long talk. And one of our vision is that you cannot propagate what you do not know. The first thing, we don't know what our cultures are. We all make assertions of multiculturalism, but you cannot pinpoint on a culture that you and I know. So we first need to know ourselves. How many of our languages
do exist?
They do exist. There are at least 250 something like that. How many of those languages are taught in schools to others who don't belong to that group? Recently, I think the Ministry of Education started an experimental project in the Northwest by bringing some major languages to be tried out in school. And this was based on a research finding which indicated that kids learn mathematics and science much faster and better through the use of the local language, not English. That is already a policy, sharing even our own languages, sharing even our own values. And we can never resolve it by just organizing festivals. Festivals, organization of festivals is just a demonstration of our difference, not of our unity. But the politicians should use some of us to figure out how cultural deconstruction can occur, because that is where the problem is. And if you cannot, because all these things is in the mind. I quote you an example. I went to Madagascar to help them deal with an epidemic. 3,000 people died within 3 months because of cholera. And the government of Madagascar did not know what was happening because people were just dying. And WHO called me and said, could you go to Madagascar and figure out what was happening? And lo and behold, I discovered what I'm now calling as social defecation.
Which means?
That people defecate as a collectivity, not individually. Because we eat together, communally. But the management of the waste is an individual activity. But then there are some cultures who push the whole concept of community even into defecation. If we eat together, let's defecate together. And the outbreak of cholera was due to the cultural pattern of defecation, where everybody came out in the morning. They line up on the seashore and they all defecated there together. And you greet one another and then you go away.
Prof, if you were to advise the different communities living in different parts of Cameroon on how to accommodate each other, what would that advice be?
The best thing would be to be open to one another, less discriminatory. Don't stick to some of your cultural values. Take the example of Laco in 1953, that they simply say, wherever you are living, marry local women. That's what we should be encouraging. And the more our students stick together, our schools, universities, secondary schools, if we can begin even to teach even the concept of culture and to show the kids that we belong to a republic that has core values, and those core values are in our constitution, that besides those core values, there are other values which you have inherited we need to bring on the table. Therefore, the educational system should be the channel through which we can now begin to build a new republic. Teaching those values. What are the things we teach even in our schools? We teach French history. We teach British history. And sometimes a bit of Cameroon history, but never what our culture is.
We should be fair to indicate that there is something in elementary education in this country, nursery and primary school, called citizenship. It's a subject.
You see, that's precisely where I disagree with you. Even during the age of I raised this issue of the cultural communalities that need to be taught to our kids. And somebody said, no, there is civics. Civics is not the same thing like cultural studies. I don't know.
Citizenship builds you into a citizen. Culture puts you into your ethnic group.
No. If you lose your culture, you are nothing. And we have to define what is culture first. It is not just being a citizen. Your being a citizen will give you an ID card, and that ID card indicates that you're a Cameroonian, but you're culturally a Gabonese. But you're a Cameroon citizen. So what I'm driving out is there is a misconception in the designing of what you call your programs for civic education. Because what does it contain? It doesn't contain the kinds of things I am talking about. What I wanted to say is that culture is a vast field, and it is what destroys or what builds any society. And unless we focus on it and know what it is and how to bring those differences together, we will continue to see those negative or what I call strategic ethnicities of exclusion. Ethnicity that seeks to exclude is negative, and it is not good for a nation.
Thank you very much, Professor Paul Nkwi. It was a pleasure to have you as our guest on the program Political Focus.
Thank you.
And that is where we will end today's program. Our production team included Charles Tembe, Sam Bukuba and Nelson Tawe. Our sound technicians were Maturen Sopo Kombi and Uriel Loga, while Wine Pongam was in charge of production. Remember to listen to Political Focus at your convenience on YouTube. And for presentation in Yaoundé, I am Samson Websi, thanking you for listening.